So, why does journalism matter?
So yeah, this is the kind of important thing. I mean, this is something I talk about a lot on my blog. Is basically this kind of this concept called legitimacy, where games, game review is important because it lends legitimacy. Kind of like what I talked about earlier in the podcast, where movies are seen as a mature medium, an established medium. Games are not. Games are kind of seen as a young medium, and a medium that kind of doesn't really have the the gravitas.
That
And
film
so
has, yeah.
yeah, the film has, yeah. And so basically, like, and part of that is because we have film critique that you see, we generally see movies as being a lot more established, and having good review and good, which turns into good critique for games, helps kind of accelerate games toward being accepted as this medium, as a legitimate medium, not just something for kids.
Mm-hmm. And part of the difference between game and film is that we have, 100 years of film
Right.
and development of film and techniques developing, and we can go back and see old films and analyze them historically and
Right.
show their
Right.
significance.
Right.
While gaming is, 40 years.
I mean, and I would argue that like we've seen a lot of development of games in a short period of time. But a lot of like kind of what you brought up is exactly the case, and like it's what I discuss a lot in on my blog. Like it's really hard to play a lot of older games, especially if you're talking about online games. I mean, this is one of the big problems with MMOs is that like trying to discuss example I bring up a lot is like there's this game called Neverwinter Nights
Right.
on AOL, and it used kind of the Gold Box engine. It was a multiplayer game. There's a new Neverwinter Nights game that's completely different. There's a Neverwinter online game that is basically a separate thing, so it can be a little confusing here. But there was an old game called Neverwinter Nights on AOL back in the 80s and 90s, and but like, it's almost impossible to go play it. Like I did find an emulator, essentially a single player emulator, but I mean that doesn't really give you the experience of the game because it was a multiplayer game. But we can even kind of look at modern times, like like the nostalgia for vanilla WoW. You know, unless Blizzard kind of brings out the game, it's really kind of hard to understand the game in the context of of the time, because you look at World of Warcraft now, it's a very different game than what you had back in the day.
And they're doing their push for the classic servers, but it's not going to be the same.
Right. It's not going to be the same because the audience is different. The context, the trying the games are different. There's probably going to be the desire to fix some bugs. Oh, remember that stupid timing bug that like Bob finally found a fix for? Well, like that's going to change the nature of the game. If they fixed bugs,
And like the history won't carry through. Like one of the famous incidences in WoW was the never-ending plague.
Right.
That murdered literally everybody who played the game. Got that plague at some point or another at that time.
Right.
That's not going to happen again. So there's not that keystone experience for everyone to share.
Right. Yeah, and anything that kind of feels like that was kind of a emergent behavior that was perhaps undesirable to the point of being called a bug.
Right.
It's going to get cleaned up. It's going to get purged. It's going to get sanitized, and that's going to give you a very different experience for the game. So you kind of add all these things together, and it kind of makes it hard for games to have this legitimacy. Whereas I can go and watch Citizen Kane just fine.
And you'll get the same experience that the original audience had with the film.
Right.
Although your personal context with it will be different, but
right. But you're still seeing the same film that somebody saw back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Why is this guy GGing already? Jeez.
Went for the long haul.
Get good, scrub.
Wow.
I know. I'm calling him out. I'm calling you out on the podcast. Sorry. I'm editing this part out.
I guess. Why did he not record my rug?
To punish us.
I mean, he's gonna punish himself. He just has to stick around. I mean, it would have been better leaving, but okay.
But yeah, the film, in a sense, is eternal, while games are very contextual.
Right, and there's just a whole lot that kind of contributes to that. One part is technology. Like the technology to run older games. It's hard. I mean, we luckily have things like DOSBox allow you to kind of run old DOS games, but still, I mean, it takes at least a minimum amount of technical skill in order to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't know, even if you get DOSBox working, even if you don't know DOS and whatnot, it can be potentially a little tricky trying to get a persnickety old game working. The other thing you run into is the continuous push toward modernization. Kind of the classic I like to bring up is basically like the idea that 3D was new and hot and cool for games, but 2D was old and lame. Mostly pushed by Sony when they were introducing the PlayStation 1, because that was the competitive advantage that the PlayStation 1 had over other games, so they could do 3D better.
Mm-hmm.
And so they really pushed this idea that essentially all their competitors were lame and behind the times. Whereas the PlayStation was new and modern and sleek because you could play all these 3D games.
And Nintendo literally just said, "But we have Mario."
Right. Well, I mean, obviously the other companies were able to succeed, to some extent, but yeah, I mean, you have, but yeah, like this makes it harder to appreciate older games because if they're seen as kind of old and backwards and whatnot.
You opened the relic. Finish your mission.
Which is funny because I was just thinking about streaming Ocarina of Time.
Right.
Because I was just like in the mood for it for some reason.
Yeah, but it's a shitty 3D game, so.
Well, I can get HD textures on the emulator though.
Ooh.
Yeah. Actually, I wonder if
So it looks like high definition shit instead of just
standard
blurry
shit.
shit.
Yeah.
Blurry shit. Okay.
I wonder if I can get a 3DS emulator where so I could play the 3DS version. I'll have to look into that. Because the 3DS version of Ocarina of Time looks amazing. Anyways,
So this kind of, but like I said, this ties into the larger issue of legitimacy, where games are not seen as a legitimate medium because of a lot of issues. And I think that one of the big issues you're looking at is because the kind of the two big things that I always kind of focus on myself is the history of games. It's really hard to understand history. Again, going back, we can look at old movies, we can watch old movies, we can maybe we can look at history and try to understand some of their context, the context, whereas it's a lot harder to do that with the games.
Yeah, a really good example of that is Night Trap.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good film to talk about for historical significance. It a very significant game for being in part responsible for the development of the ESRB,
Mm.
and why, and it's partly responsible for why in the gaming in gaming, sexual content is considered very deviant
Mm.
and vilified, as compared to violent content, which we eat it up like it's candy.
Right.
But if you go back and watch it or you play it now, which several YouTube channels have done recently,
Right.
You watch it and you go, this isn't violent. No, like it's soft core, the softest of soft core porn.
Right. Well, I mean, but it was, it was, and this kind of goes back to legitimacy. Is because video games, especially at the time, were seen as something, entirely for kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that basically, like kids were being exposed to the softcore porn was horrific to people.
Which, sorry, finish your thought.
Yeah, and so that's that you got essential moral panic, where oh my god, the kids are being exposed to this, and that's and video games are only for kids, and so that's the only reason, and so having this directly sexual content in there sucks.
I'm trying to remember. There's an arcade game.
Warframe crashed again.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
How dare you?
Blah blah blah. Let's see if I can actually get back in.
There's an arcade game that I saw a while back that got banned, but the controls were basically boobs.
Okay.
And the point of the game was like to pleasure a woman or something. I don't remember. I saw a image of the arcade box and it was hilarious.
Right.
But it ended up getting banned from arcades across the board after people realized what the heck it was.
Mm.
But it just made me think of that, and I want to find an image of the arcade box. Wait, maybe I'm like trying to very carefully word this into Google.
You might get all sorts of funny responses. Alright, reconnected.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, like I cannot. Trying to find this. Gotcha. It's called Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha is an arcade game developed by Atari, released in October of 1973. It was the fourth game by the company. Blah 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 blah. Gameplay. That's not the right console. Okay. The cabinet for the game was designed by Atari's product designer. His design feature was the joystick for each player, which was encased in a pink dome that the player would rest their hands on to control joysticks, meant to resemble breasts. The designer later acknowledged that they didn't have bumps on them or anything, but the way that they were sized of grapefruits next to each other, you got the impression of what they were supposed to be. And this article just caught my attention. Gotcha was not commercially successful, but later sources have described it as receiving a lukewarm reception and, quote unquote arousing little more than controversy. I just like the wording of that statement.
Yes, that was quite clever play on words there.
Right. Anyways. There's a semi-underground culture making porn games. I have no comment on this.
I mean, hentai games are a thing.
Like,
or so I've heard from like third-hand sources. Like somebody told me this.
I have a friend who.
I have a friend of a friend of a friend who once heard about it. Certainly have no direct experience myself.
They're all over page. Oh yeah, there's actually a big controversy about a porn game on Patreon or Kickstarter. I think it was Kickstarter. It was supposed to be like a resource management game where you like breed like monster girls. And like there's a whole big kerfunkle about it. Cause they're like, ew, porn game. And I don't remember what it was called. Pumpkin.
Go select cars.
Fuck. Fine. That's not the word I was looking for.
Okay.
I had like 4 words come out of my mouth at once, and I didn't know which one was gonna make it. And they all started with F.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like they decided that this one particular porn game violated terms of service, so they charged back all the donations and whatnot, and the project got kicked off the platform, if I remember correctly. Oh, he wasn't name dropping you. He was yelling at me. Get over yourself.
Oh, you're special. Don't worry. Molligrim's just a prima donna.
Wow. Okay. So for game criticism, we are way off subject for this segment. So much editing is going to be required.
Look, you're the one who went off on this one, so.
For criticism and legitimacy.
Right.
I'm looking at the wrong thing here.
So I think we can look at like that. We can look at kind of movie criticism, kind of being an example, where like a movie, a criticism and an evaluation of a movie, even if it's kind of a low quality one, can still still elevates that to the level of something to something worthy of criticism.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas not having game criticism kind of like implies that games are not worthy of criticism. Like they're too shallow to have criticism of. I don't think that's quite accurate. I think it's it's just that a lot of film criticism kind of came out of film review, so we don't have that kind of the serious game reviews that movies do, so we never got that next evolutionary step.
Which is, it's a matter of time before. Yeah, I mean, we'll reach it as a society. It's just time.
Well, I think we are, but as a game developer, like you kind of want things sooner rather than later. Like it doesn't comfort me that in 100 years, taking a serious medium, after I'm dead.
Right.
This is the kind of cold comfort, if any comfort at all. So.
But a good thing to think about though is what will come out of criticism for games, and how would getting legitimacy through criticism changed the industry.
Right. Well, yeah, I think I think it would kind of help because it would kind of keep the game developers a little more honest in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would have to kind of deal with criticism, it, rather than just worry about poor reviews, hurting sales.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at trying to get valuable criticism being held up by game critics would potentially be kind of a prestige thing. Rather than kind of relying on sales figures. Oh, Blizzard obviously makes great games because they sell really well. There's something about Blizzard's games that potentially transcends just their ability to sell well.
Right.
But we don't have the great critics to kind of identify that.
With criticism, we'd be able to acknowledge things like art house pieces better.
Right.
Than Mega Million AAA. I mean that would be like the indie games, would be like the art house
extract
films.
I need to go feed some more relics or refine some more relics. But yeah, I mean, you're right though. Exactly that where like the equivalent of art house films. Which we kind of look at and games would be kind of the indie projects.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where no indie game is going to become a critical darling because like we mentioned game reviewers have very little motivation to kind of find a good indie game and kind of elevate it. But if you had game critics could basically potentially look at an indie game and say, oh, they're taking this mechanic or this idea or this concept from this other game and they're kind of applying it to the kind of a new
level.
Right.
Yeah. And that would help in a sense define games easier, where say you have a game that's designed for speedrunning.
Mm-hmm.
A critic would be able to look at a game with their encyclopedic knowledge of gaming,
right,
theoretically, and go, oh, this is perfect for speedrunning. This is the game I would recommend for a up and coming speedrunner to get into. This is the best game, to get your world first times on because this game is obviously designed for it.
Right. I think that and one of the things that we talked about before too is kind of the idea that game journalism is useful for gamers, but it's also a way for kind of non-gamers to understand games. When you have, people are so when you have fans speaking to fans, you don't have, kind of that outreach. You don't have people kind of, you don't have non-gamers kind of looking at it. Oh, I get this. Movies are kind of like a pretty accepted part of our culture now, so you don't have quite the same thing as that. But still, say somebody's not a big movie fan, if some, they could potentially read a game criticism. I guess the example I would use would be a music criticism.
Mm-hmm.
I understand jazz is really highbrow stuff and whatnot, but I don't quite understand enough about music to kind of really appreciate jazz. Right. But I can sit down and watch, a YouTube video or read a critique about a piece and kind of get an idea oh, okay, I understand this now. But how do the question is, in a legitimacy point of view, is how do we get to do the same thing for non-gamers? How can non-gamers sit down, look at something, and understand like, oh, okay, yeah, some care and intention, and like, and work was put into this that they might not understand just from kind of loading up the game and playing it.
You get Nintendo to make a version of Wii Sports.
Right? Yeah, I mean, and yeah, the Wii and Wii Sports is kind of interesting, yeah, because it was basically kind of the controller, which kind of a lot of people kind of had a lot of negative feelings about, because it was kind of gimmicky and waggly and whatnot. But yeah, like it really did kind of like draw a whole lot of people into games because it was an interface that basically kind of was easier for kind of non-gamers to understand, whereas pressing directions and pressing buttons and whatnot, especially before computers became quite as ubiquitous as they are today, it was kind of this unknown thing. I mean, I'm old enough to remember like when a mouse was like a really weird thing for people to try to have to understand, and like some people want to put the mouse on the computer monitor and move it around to kind of understand that, because if you really think about it, like moving a computer mouse, you're moving in one plane and the result is happening in a perpendicular plane.
Oh yeah, like conceptually, it's a really weird mechanic.
Right. And so like you had a lot of that same kind of idea, or that same kind of like block for people when it came to using a controller. The Wii controller is basically a way for to say, okay, no, you just like you pick up a tennis racket and move it around, like you can do the same thing with the Wii controller.
And Nintendo is very, very clever about that, because like one of the biggest complaints for non-gamers to like pick up an Xbox controller or a PlayStation controller is, what button do I press?
Right.
With the Wiimote in particular, the two buttons that you want to push are very obvious for most games. It's the A button on the thumb and the B button on the trigger. Like, and it's easy for someone to explain. Oh no, you push the thumb button. No, you push the trigger.
Right. Pull the trigger, push the thumb button. Yeah. It becomes very obvious. And there was a big kind of push toward that even in regular games, kind of like the minimal input, minimal UI, kind of trying to follow that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last thing about legitimacy and talking about journalism that I kind of want to mention before we close this up is basically kind of like, I think journalism has the potential for kind of shining a light on kind of some really dark topics in game development.
Mm-hmm.
Especially kind of on the professional side of things, because there's a lot of kind of like really bad things that happen in the game industry, and we talked about this before, like crunch, essentially kind of outright abuse of employees, developers burning out, a lot of kind of the bigotry that happens, related to gender and race and age, or anybody who doesn't fit kind of the normal kind of idea, the stereotype of a young, barely out of college single guy, kind of gets really put by the wayside and really kind of ignored. And I think that like having strong journalism that that can potentially look at issues like that becomes really interesting. I talked about this friend of mine who tried to run a game site, and one of the things that she tried to do, and like this, I think it's kind of like really kind of broke her in some ways, is that she lived in Arizona, and Arizona had this a development fund for games. They're trying to attract game developers, and basically there was this one company that was completely abusing this, essentially sucking up all the money for a project that was like foreign people from the outside could see like, okay, this is going to fail. But like they essentially were just the leaders of the company were kind of lining their own pockets. They were dragging people to Arizona, saying that we're creating all these jobs when the project was going to fail. And the project failed, but my friend tried to be an actual journalist and try to kind of point out like this stuff's going bad, but like nobody kind of I mean, part of it was nobody cared about that, and like part of it was like there's really no there's no platform for that. There's no platform for for kind of expressing this type of thing, to get that type of thing out. So it'd be nice to have that platform, have a site that's like, okay, hey, we're going to look at a lot of these deeper issues beyond just, hey, is this game fun to play? But were the developers treated right? Did the company just fire people when the project was ready to ship? You know, did the developers make people work 120-hour a week crunch? Or was it done ethically and fairly and nicely? But